In a small Mississippi town, 7-year-old Aiden's whispered words shatter the morning calm of Mrs. Langford's third-grade classroom. "It hurts so much. It was my dad." Those 6 words unlock a mystery darker than anyone could imagine. When a crumpled note is discovered in a school bathroom, "I don't want to live with my dad anymore. He hates me." Mrs. Langford begins to unravel a web of lies that has trapped both a child and his mother. Behind a locked bedroom door in an ordinary house lies an extraordinary secret, a room that Aiden is forbidden to enter, a mother who supposedly died of cancer 2 years ago, strange stains beneath a hallway rug, and a hidden letter with a desperate message. "If anyone finds this, please tell my son that I never left him." As Mrs. Langford races against time to save a boy whose silent pain speaks volumes, she discovers that sometimes the most monstrous acts happen behind the most ordinary doors. What really happened to Aiden's mother? What lies beneath the floorboards of the locked room? And can one dedicated teacher find the truth before it's too late? Don't forget to follow our channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from to join thousands of others piecing together this heartbreaking mystery. The day dawned overcast in Tupelo, Mississippi. 7-year-old Aiden walked alone toward school, his shoelaces untied and backpack unzipped. His hair was disheveled, and his t-shirt was too thin for the morning chill that had settled over the small town. The boy's small shoulders hunched forward as he trudged along the sidewalk, occasionally glancing back as if expecting someone to follow him. When he arrived at Parkway Elementary, the hallways were already bustling with children's laughter and morning announcements crackling through the speakers. But Aiden moved silently, like a shadow, his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. By the time he slipped into Mrs. Langford's third-grade classroom, the veteran teacher was already writing the day's schedule on the whiteboard. Mrs. Langford had been teaching for 23 years, long enough to recognize when something wasn't right with one of her students. As the children settled into their morning routine, her eyes kept returning to Aiden. Usually quiet, today the boy seemed different. His eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, and his small hand kept pressing against his abdomen as if trying to hold something inside. "Good morning, everyone," Mrs. Langford said with practiced cheerfulness, scanning the room of 22 young faces. "Let's start with our morning circle before math." The children gathered on the colorful rug at the front of the classroom, forming a lopsided circle, all except Aiden, who remained at his desk. "Aiden, honey, would you like to join us?" Mrs. Langford asked, keeping her voice gentle. The boy looked up, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment, before darting away. He slid off his chair and shuffled toward the group. As he tried to sit cross-legged like the others, a grimace of pain crossed his face. Mrs. Langford moved closer, kneeling beside him. Before she could ask what was wrong, Aiden's voice came out in a barely audible whisper. "It hurts so much." The classroom fell silent. Even the perpetually chattering Lily and Zach stopped their whispered conversation. 21 pairs of curious eyes turned toward their classmate. "What hurts, sweetheart?" Mrs. Langford asked, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Aiden's lower lip trembled. A single tear escaped, tracking down his pale cheek. "My stomach. My back." He paused, swallowing hard before adding in a voice so quiet Mrs. Langford had to lean in to hear, "It was my dad." The classroom seemed to freeze. Mrs. Langford felt a chill run down her spine as the words hung in the air between them. With practiced composure that belied the alarm bells ringing in her head, she stood up. "Emma, would you please be my special helper and read the morning message to everyone? I need to help Aiden for a moment." The pigtailed girl nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation despite her young age. Mrs. Langford guided Aiden from the classroom, her hand light on his back as they walked to the nurse's office. School nurse Patty Jackson looked up from her paperwork as they entered. One look at Mrs. Langford's face told her this wasn't a routine scraped knee or stomach ache. "Aiden's not feeling well," Mrs. Langford explained, her eyes communicating what she couldn't say aloud. "He says he's in pain." In the clinical light of the nurse's office, Aiden sat on the examination table, his legs dangling. His hands trembled as Nurse Jackson gently asked questions about where it hurt and for how long. But when she suggested checking under his shirt, he wrapped his arms protectively around himself and shook his head violently. "I don't see any visible injuries," Nurse Jackson said quietly to Mrs. Langford, while Aiden sat hunched on the exam table. "But that doesn't mean there aren't any." Principal Diana Morton arrived shortly after, her normally cheerful face now serious. "I've called Ms. Rodriguez from Child Services," she whispered to Mrs. Langford. "She'll be here in 30 minutes. But before the social worker could arrive, the front office called. Aiden's father was already in the building, demanding to know why he'd been called away from work. Wendell Hale swept into the nurse's office like a cold front, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that never quite smiled when his mouth did. He wore a crisp, button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up precisely to the elbows, revealing muscular forearms. "What's all this about?" he asked, his voice gruff. "I've got a business to run." Aiden's entire body tensed at the sound of his father's voice. He curled inward, making himself smaller on the exam table. Mrs. Langford stepped forward. "Aiden told us he's in pain, Mr. Hale," he said. "He's always complaining about something," Wendell interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "The boy's too sensitive. Gets that from his mother." He turned his attention to his son, his expression hardening. "Aiden, stop wasting everyone's time." Principal Morton stepped between them. "Mr. Hale, we're concerned about Aiden's well-being. Perhaps we should wait for the social worker to—" "Social worker?" Wendell's voice dropped dangerously. "You called a social worker because my kid has a stomachache?" He looked at Aiden, whose eyes were now fixed on the floor. "Get your backpack. We're leaving." "Mr. Hale, we have procedures we need to follow," Principal Morton began. "My son, my decision," Wendell stated flatly. "Unless you have evidence of something beyond a boy looking for attention." No one spoke. There were no visible bruises, no concrete evidence, just a child's whispered accusation and the trembling of his small hands. "That's what I thought," Wendell said, placing a hand on Aiden's shoulder that looked gentle to anyone who wasn't watching the boy's face. "Come on, son." Aiden slid off the table, his movements careful and measured. He didn't look up as his father guided him from the room. Mrs. Langford felt helpless as she watched them go, the boy's shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. The next morning, Aiden returned to school wearing the same clothes as the day before. His eyes were even more vacant, like shuttered windows. He spoke to no one, not even Maya, who tried to share her fruit snacks with him at lunch. It was late afternoon when Mrs. Langford entered the girls' bathroom to fetch a roll of paper towels for a classroom spill. As she reached for the dispenser, something in the trash can caught her eye, a crumpled piece of paper with childish handwriting. She shouldn't have looked, knew she shouldn't invade a student's privacy, but something made her retrieve it. Smoothing out the paper, she recognized Aiden's careful printing immediately. The paper was blotched with tear stains that had dried, wrinkling the paper and blurring some of the words. But the message was clear. "I don't want to live with my dad anymore. He hates me." Mrs. Langford's hand flew to her mouth as she stared at the 7 words that broke her heart. In that moment, she made a silent promise to the boy with the sad eyes and untied shoelaces. She would not let this cry for help go unanswered. Mrs. Langford sat alone in her classroom as the afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the empty desks. The crumpled note trembled in her hands, its message burning into her mind like a brand. "I don't want to live with my dad anymore. He hates me." Such simple words from a 7-year-old boy, yet they carried the weight of an entire hidden world of pain. She carefully folded the note and tucked it into her desk drawer, beneath her lesson planner and stack of ungraded spelling tests. Her first instinct had been to rush straight to Principal Morton's office, to wave the paper like a flag, and demand immediate action. But 23 years of teaching had taught her that sometimes rushing forward was the quickest way to lose ground entirely. "If I show this now, what happens?" she whispered to herself, rubbing her temples. Child Services would be called again, questions would be asked, and Wendell Hale would once more sweep in with his practiced smile and convincing explanations. And Aiden might close off completely, the fragile trust he'd shown by his whispered confession shattered beyond repair. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet classroom. Mrs. Langford made her decision. She would watch, wait, and gather more information. Build a case that couldn't be dismissed with a wave of a father's authoritative hand. But most importantly, she would let Aiden know, in 100 small ways, that he wasn't alone. The next morning, she placed a granola bar and small carton of milk on Aiden's desk before the students arrived. When the boy entered and saw the food, his eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before the now familiar blankness returned. He ate silently, methodically, like someone who had learned that even eating too loudly might draw unwanted attention. During reading circle, Mrs. Langford chose The Invisible String, a story about the invisible connections of love that bind people together even when they're apart. As she read, she noticed Aiden watching her with unusual intensity, his eyes fixed on the illustrations of mothers and children connected by magical red strings that stretched across oceans and mountains. When the class dispersed for independent work, she knelt beside his desk. "Did you like the story, Aiden?" He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Who do you think about when you imagine your invisible strings?" she asked softly. Aiden's gaze drifted to the window where autumn leaves tumbled across the playground. For a moment, Mrs. Langford thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, hushed and wistful. "My mom, she's sleeping, for a long time now." The words settled between them like dust. Mrs. Langford had read Aiden's file when he transferred to Parkway Elementary 6 months ago. Wendell Hale had informed the school that his wife had died of cancer 2 years earlier. No details beyond that were ever provided, and Aiden had never mentioned her until this moment. "I bet she thinks about you all the time," Mrs. Langford said gently. Something flickered across Aiden's face, not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes. Then just as quickly, it vanished. That afternoon during art time, Mrs. Langford noticed Aiden hunched over his paper, concentrating with unusual focus. Normally, he drew perfunctory pictures, stick figures and basic houses, completed as quickly as possible. But today, his crayon moved with deliberate care across the page. When she collected the drawings, she found his buried beneath several others. Unlike the bright landscapes and superhero scenes from his classmates, Aiden's drawing was rendered in dark blue and purple. It showed a house with a single room highlighted, inside which was the figure of a woman with long dark hair. The door to the room had an enormous lock drawn on it, disproportionately large compared to the rest of the house. Mrs. Langford turned the paper over and her breath caught. On the back, in his careful printing, Aiden had written, "It's the room I'm not allowed to enter." That night, sleep eluded Mrs. Langford. She tossed in her bed, the sheets twisting around her legs as her mind raced. At 2:17 a.m. she gave up, padding downstairs to make a cup of tea. Her husband Tom found her at the kitchen table an hour later, surrounded by papers and her laptop open to the school's student information system. "Sarah, what are you doing up at this hour?" he asked, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Looking for ghosts," she murmured, not taking her eyes off the screen. Tom peered over her shoulder at the student record displayed. "Aiden Hale? Isn't that the quiet boy you mentioned? The one with the one whose father gives me the creeps, yes," Mrs. Langford finished. "I'm trying to find information about his mother." She scrolled through the sparse records. Emergency contact, Wendell Hale. Medical information, no known allergies. Previous school, homeschooled. Mother's name, Marissa Hale, deceased. "That's strange," Mrs. Langford said, frowning at the screen. "When I first got his file months ago, there was more information here. A phone number for his maternal grandmother, I think, and his mother's maiden name." "Records get updated all the time," Tom suggested, squeezing her shoulder. "Or deliberately scrubbed," she countered, opening a new browser tab. She typed Marissa Hale Tupelo, Mississippi obituary into the search bar. Nothing relevant appeared. She tried variations, adding cancer, death, funeral, but came up empty-handed. No social media profiles, no local news mentions, not even a record in the digital archives of the daily journal Tupelo's newspaper. How does a woman die in a small city like Tupelo and leave no trace? Mrs. Langford whispered, pushing back from the computer. No obituary, no funeral announcement, nothing. Tom frowned, now fully awake and concerned. What are you thinking, Sarah? She closed her laptop slowly. I'm thinking that either Marissa Hale was a ghost in life, or something about her death doesn't add up. She looked up at her husband, her eyes troubled. People don't just vanish without leaving ripples, Tom. Not even when they die. Especially not mothers. The next morning, Mrs. Langford watched Aidan more carefully than ever. The way he winced slightly when sitting in his chair. How he startled at sudden movements. The hollow look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. During recess, while the other children played tag and climbed on the jungle gym, Aidan sat alone on a bench near the fence, watching the clouds scud across the October sky. Mrs. Langford approached and sat beside him, leaving plenty of space between them. Those clouds look like ships sailing across the ocean, don't they? She said conversationally. Aidan nodded, his gaze never leaving the sky. Aidan, she said softly, you know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all that's bothering you or making you scared. His small hands twisted in his lap. For a moment, Mrs. Langford thought he might speak, might finally open the door to whatever darkness was consuming him. But then the recess bell rang, shattering the moment. The boy slid off the bench and walked toward the school building, his shadow stretching long behind him on the asphalt. As she watched him go, Mrs. Langford made a silent vow. She would find out what happened to Marissa Hale. And she would discover what secret lay behind the locked door in Aidan's drawing, the door that seemed to have locked away his childhood, along with whatever, or whoever, was hidden inside. Mrs. Langford pulled into the school parking lot earlier than usual the following Monday, the weak autumn sun barely cresting the horizon. A thin layer of frost coated the windshields of the few cars already parked in the teacher's lot, glittering like diamond dust in the early morning light. She hadn't slept well all weekend, her dreams haunted by locked doors and a faceless woman with long dark hair calling out for help. The weekend had given her time to think, to plan, to listen to the growing intuition that something was deeply wrong in Aidan's home. Not just the garden variety dysfunction that teachers occasionally encountered, but something darker, something dangerous. She'd spent Sunday afternoon in her home office, researching child abuse warning signs on her personal laptop rather than her school computer. The list had made her stomach clench: withdrawal from friends and activities, reluctance to go home, unexplained injuries, inappropriate clothing for the weather, frequent absences. Aidan checked nearly every box. Now, sitting at her desk in the still empty classroom, Mrs. Langford flipped through her lesson planner with unseeing eyes. Today, she would watch Aidan more carefully than ever before, document everything, build a case that even Wendell Hale's imposing presence couldn't dismiss. The students filed in at 8:15, a chattering, energetic wave of primary colors and morning restlessness. Aidan slipped in among them, almost invisible in his faded gray t-shirt and too large jeans. Dark circles smudged the skin beneath his eyes, making him look older than his 7 years. He moved stiffly, carefully, like someone navigating a room full of broken glass. "Good morning, everyone," Mrs. Langford said brightly, hiding her concern behind a practiced smile. "Let's start with our weekly community circle. Bring your sharing items and join me on the rug." The children gathered eagerly, clutching small treasures from home. A special rock, a grandfather's pocket watch, a postcard from an aunt in California. Aidan came empty-handed, as he always did. He sat on the outer edge of the circle, his thin legs stretched out in front of him rather than crossed like the others. "Today we're sharing something about our families," Mrs. Langford said. "Something that makes your family special, or different from other families." One by one, the children spoke. Lily's family ate pizza every Friday night. Zach's grandpa lived with them and told the best bedtime stories. Maya had 2 moms who both came to her soccer games and cheered louder than anyone else. When it was Aidan's turn, he stared at his hands. "I don't have anything," he whispered. Everyone's family has something special, Mrs. Langford encouraged gently, even if it's small. Aiden's eyes remained fixed on his lap. My dad makes pancakes on Sundays sometimes, he finally offered, his voice so low that Mrs. Langford had to lean forward to hear. When he's not mad. A heavy silence fell over the circle. The other children exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the weight behind his words even if they couldn't fully understand it. That sounds nice, Mrs. Langford said, forcing warmth into her voice. Thank you for sharing, Aiden. After community circle came group activities. Mrs. Langford divided the class into 4 teams for a math game involving sitting on the floor and arranging numbered cards in sequence. When she announced the groups, Aiden's face went pale. Can I just do it at my desk? He asked, a note of panic in his voice. The cards need space to spread out, honey. The floor works best, Mrs. Langford explained. Aiden followed his group reluctantly to their designated corner. When the other children plopped down cross-legged on the carpet, he remained standing, shifting his weight from foot to foot. You gotta sit down, said Jackson, a boisterous boy with freckles sprinkled across his nose. We can't all reach the cards if you're standing. Mrs. Langford watched as Aiden slowly, painfully lowered himself to sit on his knees rather than cross-legged. Even then, he winced visibly, his small face contorting with discomfort. When she approached their group to check on their progress, she saw that his knees were trembling with the effort of maintaining the position. Aiden, could you come help me with something at my desk? She asked, creating an excuse to pull him aside. He followed her gratefully, relief washing over his features as he stood up. Are your legs hurting today? She asked, when they were out of earshot of the other children. He nodded, eyes downcast. Would you like to go see Nurse Jackson? A flash of fear crossed his face. No, my dad said no more nurse visits. He said I'd be in big trouble. Mrs. Langford's heart clenched. Okay, she said softly. How about you help me organize these papers instead of rejoining your group? You can sit in my chair. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully. When the children filed out for lunch, Mrs. Langford pulled her cell phone from her desk drawer and made a quick call to an old college friend, Jennifer Rodriguez, who now worked in Child Protective Services in a neighboring county. I need advice, Jen, she said quietly, pacing by the windows. Not an official report yet, just guidance. She described what she'd observed with Aiden, the pain, the withdrawal, the cryptic comments, the drawing of the locked room. Jennifer listened without interrupting, then sighed heavily. It sounds concerning, Sarah, but you know how this works, without visible marks or a direct disclosure from the child. I know, Mrs. Langford said, frustration edging her voice, but my gut is screaming that something is very wrong in that house. Document everything, Jennifer advised. Build your case, and Sarah, be careful. If your instincts are right and this father is dangerous, you don't want to corner him without solid evidence and a safety plan for the boy. After lunch, Mrs. Langford noticed that Aiden had gravitated toward Maya during free choice time. The two sat at a small table in the reading corner, coloring quietly. Mrs. Langford moved closer, pretending to straighten books on a nearby shelf. My mom used to read me stories every night, Aiden was saying softly. She made different voices for all the characters. Maya nodded, her dark ponytail bobbing. That sounds nice. Do you miss her a lot? Aiden's crayon stilled on the page. Yeah, all the time. Maya colored in silence for a moment, then asked, Do you think moms who die can write hidden letters? Mrs. Langford froze, her hand halfway to a book. The innocent question hung in the air, unexpectedly profound coming from a 7-year-old. Aiden's response was thoughtful, his voice stronger than Mrs. Langford had ever heard it. I think so, if they love you enough. The exchange replayed in Mrs. Langford's mind all week as she continued her quiet investigation. She called Aiden's previous school, only to be told they had no record of him ever being enrolled, contradicting what his file said about being transferred. She discreetly asked other teachers if they'd ever met Wendell Hale's wife before her supposed death, but no one recalled ever seeing her at school functions. Finally, after days of dead ends, Mrs. Langford remembered something. 2 years ago, before Aiden was in her class, she'd seen a small boy, it must have been him, accompanied by an elderly woman at the fall festival. Not his mother, but perhaps a grandmother or babysitter. Through careful questioning of the school secretary, who knew everyone in town, Mrs. Langford got a name: Esther Wilkins, a retired nurse who had worked as a nanny for several local families. It took 3 more days and numerous phone calls to track down a current number for her. The following Friday afternoon, Mrs. Langford sat in a small cafe 10 miles outside of Tupelo, nervously turning a ceramic mug of coffee between her palms. The bell above the door jingled, and a petite, silver-haired woman entered, looking around uncertainly. "Mrs. Wilkins?" Mrs. Langford called, standing up. "Thank you so much for meeting me." Esther Wilkins had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and hands spotted with age. "Call me Esther, dear. And I was curious why Aiden's teacher wanted to meet me so urgently. Is he doing all right? Such a sweet boy. That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Mrs. Langford said, lowering her voice as the older woman settled across from her. "I'm concerned about him." She explained her observations: the boy's pain, his withdrawal, the drawing of the locked room. With each detail, Esther's expression grew more troubled. "I was only with them for 8 months, she said finally. "Marissa hired me when Aiden was 5 after they moved here from Nashville. She was lovely, artistic, always singing. But Wendell?" She shook her head. "Cold as ice, that man. I never understood what she saw in him." "And Marissa died 2 years ago?" Mrs. Langford prompted gently. Esther's eyes narrowed. "Is that what he's telling people?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That woman didn't die. One day she was there arguing with Wendell about taking Aiden to her parents in Florida. The next day, Wendell told me she'd gone away for a while and not to discuss it with Aiden." Mrs. Langford felt her pulse quicken. "And then?" "2 weeks later, he fired me without notice. Said they wouldn't need my services anymore." Esther's weathered hands trembled slightly as she lifted her tea. "The strange thing was, after that, he never let anyone into the back bedroom again. Said it was where she rested now and needed to be kept undisturbed." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "But there were stains under the rug in the hallway outside that room. Dark stains. I noticed them when I was cleaning one day right before he let me go." A chill ran through Mrs. Langford's body despite the warmth of the cafe. The implication of Esther's words hung between them, too terrible to voice aloud. "Esther," she said carefully, "do you think Marissa Hale might still be alive?" The older woman's eyes met hers, filled with a haunted uncertainty. "I don't know, dear, but something happened in that house. Something that little boy knows about but is too afraid to tell." The revelation from Esther Wilkins haunted Mrs. Langford throughout the weekend. She moved through her usual Saturday errands in a fog, loading groceries into her cart without seeing them, smiling at neighbors without really hearing their greetings. Her mind kept returning to those dark stains beneath the rug, to a locked bedroom where a woman supposedly rested, to a little boy carrying the weight of an unspeakable secret. By Sunday evening, pacing her living room while her husband watched football with the volume turned low, she'd made her decision. She would go to the Hale house herself. "Sarah, are you sure this is wise?" Tom asked, muting the TV as she outlined her plan. "If your suspicions are correct, this man could be dangerous." She sat beside him on the couch, clasping his hand in hers. "I'm not going to confront him, Tom. I'm just going to deliver some school materials Aiden needs. A perfectly normal teacher visit. I just want to see the house, get a feel for the environment." She didn't add that she desperately wanted to glimpse that locked room, to confirm with her own eyes what Aiden had drawn with such careful detail. Monday morning dawned bright and crisp, autumn finally asserting itself after weeks of lingering summer heat. Mrs. Langford watched as Aiden shuffled into class, his shoulders hunched forward as if bracing against an invisible wind. She noticed he was wearing a clean shirt today, navy blue with a faded rocket ship on the front, but the same worn jeans as last week. "Good morning, Aiden," she said warmly. "I have some special materials for our science project that I'd like to drop off at your house after school today. Is that okay?" Fear flickered across his face, quickly replaced by the now familiar blank expression. "My dad doesn't like visitors. It will just take a minute," she assured him. "I'll have a note from Principal Morton explaining why I need to deliver these materials personally." Aiden said nothing more, but as he turned away, Mrs. Langford caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Not fear this time, but something that looked almost like hope. The school day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Mrs. Langford found herself checking the clock every few minutes, her stomach knotting with apprehension as 3:30 approached. She'd arranged for Principal Morton to write an official-looking letter authorizing her to deliver specialized science curriculum materials to the Hale residents, a small deception that sat uneasily on her conscience but seemed necessary given the circumstances. At precisely 4:15 p.m., Mrs. Langford pulled up to the curb in front of 1823 Magnolia Drive. The Hale house was a modest single-story ranch with faded blue siding and patchy grass in the front yard. A large oak tree dominated the left side of the property, its sprawling branches casting long shadows across the roof. Nothing about the exterior suggested the darkness she suspected lurked within. No broken windows, no peeling paint, nothing to draw the attention of neighbors or passers-by. She gathered her tote bag containing a few science worksheets and a children's book about the solar system, her flimsy pretext, and made her way up the cracked concrete path to the front door. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed the doorbell, hearing its muffled chime echo inside. Footsteps approached, heavy and measured. The door swung open to reveal Wendell Hale, his tall frame filling the doorway. He wore khaki pants and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, as if he'd just returned from work. His dark hair was neatly combed, his jawline clean-shaven. To anyone else, he would have looked like the perfect picture of middle-class respectability. But Mrs. Langford noticed details that told a different story. The slight redness around his knuckles, the calculating coldness in his eyes that his polite smile couldn't disguise, the faint smell of whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. "Mrs. Langford," he said, his voice a carefully modulated baritone. "This is unexpected." She held up the tote bag and Principal Morton's letter. "I have some materials for Aiden's science project. The school asked me to deliver them personally since they include some specialized items that need explanation." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Wendell's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as he scanned the letter. For a moment, Mrs. Langford thought he might refuse her entry, might close the door in her face and end her investigation before it began. But then his lips curved into what was surely meant to be a charming smile, but looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "Of course," he said, stepping back. "Aiden is in his room. Please come in." The interior of the house was immaculate, almost unnaturally so for a home with a 7-year-old boy. No toys scattered on the hardwood floors, no jackets hung haphazardly on hooks, no cheerful artwork magnetized to the refrigerator. The living room furniture looked barely used, the beige sofa cushions perfectly aligned, the glass coffee table free of fingerprints or water rings. "Aiden?" Wendell called, his voice echoing down the hallway. "Your teacher is here." A door opened at the far end of the hall, and Aiden emerged, his small face a mask of careful neutrality. Only his eyes darting nervously between his father and Mrs. Langford betrayed his anxiety. "Hello, Mrs. Langford," he said quietly. "I brought those science materials I mentioned," she said, injecting warmth into her voice. "Shall we look at them in your room?" Before Aiden could respond, Wendell interjected. "The kitchen table would be better, more space." Mrs. Langford nodded agreeably, though frustration churned inside her. She'd hoped to see Aiden's bedroom, to perhaps gain more insight into his home life away from his father's watchful gaze. But she couldn't push too hard, couldn't risk arousing Wendell's suspicion. As they moved toward the kitchen, Mrs. Langford deliberately took a wrong turn down the hallway, allowing her gaze to sweep the corridor. 4 doors lined the hall, presumably bedrooms and a bathroom. One door, at the very end, had a deadbolt lock installed on the outside, visible even from where she stood. "The kitchen is this way," Wendell said sharply, gesturing in the opposite direction. "Oh, I'm sorry." Mrs. Langford laughed lightly. "I got turned around." As she turned back, she noticed Aiden watching her intently, his eyes moving meaningfully toward that locked door, then back to her face. In the kitchen, Mrs. Langford spread out the science worksheets on the table while Wendell hovered nearby, his presence a looming shadow. She explained the solar system project to Aiden, describing how he would create a model of the planets using the materials she'd brought. "That locked room I passed," she said casually, as if making conversation while Aiden examined a worksheet. "Is that your home office, Mr. Hale?" A muscle twitched in Wendell's jaw. "It was my wife's room," he said flatly. "I keep it as she left it, a memorial of sorts." "That's lovely," Mrs. Langford murmured. It must be comforting for Aiden to have a space that reminds him of his mother. "Aiden doesn't go in there," Wendell said, his tone brooking no argument. "No one does. I prefer to keep her things undisturbed." Aiden's pencil stilled on his paper, his knuckles white around the yellow wood. "I understand," Mrs. Langford said softly. "Loss affects us all differently." She turned to Aiden, who was staring fixedly at the table. "I brought you something else too, a little coloring book about space. Perhaps you could color some pages when you have time and share them with the class." She pulled out a thin activity book filled with simple line drawings of planets, stars, and spaceships. As she handed it to him, her eyes met his, trying to communicate that there was more to this gift than crayon work. "Thank you," Aiden whispered, his fingers closing around the book. "Well, I should be going," Mrs. Langford said, gathering her tote bag. "Thank you for allowing me to drop these off, Mr. Hale." "Any time," he replied, though his tone suggested the exact opposite. As she walked to the door, Aiden trailing behind with his father, Mrs. Langford caught one more glimpse down that hallway, at the door with its heavy deadbolt. Whatever secret lay behind it, she was more determined than ever to uncover it. 3 days later, Aiden quietly slipped the coloring book onto Mrs. Langford's desk during morning free reading time. She waited until lunch break to examine it, locking her classroom door to ensure privacy. Most of the pages were still blank, but in the middle of the book, Aiden had colored a scene of the Earth viewed from space. On the reverse side, he had done something unexpected, drawn what appeared to be a crude floor plan of his house. The rooms were labeled in his careful printing: kitchen, living room, bathroom, dad's room, my room. And at the end of the hallway, the largest room was simply labeled her room, with a large lock drawn on the door. But it was what he'd written inside that room that made Mrs. Langford's blood run cold. 3 simple words that confirmed her worst fears. "It's under the floor." She stared at the childish drawing, understanding dawning with horrifying clarity. Aiden wasn't just telling her about a locked room, he was telling her where to look. Whatever secret Wendell Hale was hiding, whatever had happened to Marissa, the evidence was beneath the floorboards of that locked bedroom. Mrs. Langford's hands trembled as she carefully folded Aiden's drawing and slipped it into a manila envelope. The classroom felt suddenly airless, the walls closing in around her as the implications of those 3 words, "It's under the floor," echoed in her mind. What exactly was beneath those floorboards? Evidence of abuse? Drugs? Or something far worse that she dared not name, even in her thoughts? She gathered her composure and unlocked her classroom door just as the lunch bell rang, signaling the imminent return of 22 energetic third graders. Through the remainder of the day, she maintained her professional facade with superhuman effort, reading aloud from Charlotte's Web with all the proper inflections, supervising the science experiment with appropriate enthusiasm, all while her mind raced with possible courses of action. That evening, Mrs. Langford drove straight to the local Child Protective Services office, the manila envelope secure in her purse. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the waiting area, casting a sickly glow over the worn furniture and outdated magazines. After 20 minutes, a harried-looking woman with silver-streaked dark hair and rectangular glasses emerged from a back office. Mrs. Langford, I'm Diana Chen, intake supervisor. Please come back to my office. Mrs. Langford followed her down a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets to a small office cluttered with stacks of folders and multiple coffee mugs in various stages of emptiness. Ms. Chen gestured to a chair across from her desk and settled into her own with a weary sigh. I understand you have concerns about one of your students. For the next half hour, Mrs. Langford laid out everything she knew: Aiden's pain and fearfulness, the mysterious circumstances surrounding his mother's supposed death, Esther's account of the stains beneath the rug, the locked room, and finally, the drawing with its chilling message. Ms. Chen listened attentively, taking occasional notes. When Mrs. Langford finished, she removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Mrs. Langford, I appreciate your thoroughness and your concern for this child. And I agree that there are numerous red flags here. She leaned forward, her expression grave. But I need to be clear about our constraints. Without either visible injuries or a direct disclosure from Aiden, we can't immediately remove him from the home. But the drawing is concerning, yes, but it's also ambiguous. It's under the floor, could mean many things, and a court would require more concrete evidence before authorizing removal. Mrs. Langford felt a surge of frustration. By the time we have concrete evidence, it could be too late for Aiden. Ms. Chen's expression softened. I understand your frustration. Believe me, I do. But there are legal procedures we must follow. What I can do is open an investigation. We'll send someone to conduct a home visit and interview both Aiden and his father separately. When? Within the next 48 to 72 hours. That's not soon enough, Mrs. Langford said, her voice rising. Wendell Hale is dangerous. I can feel it. And if he suspects he's being investigated... Mrs. Langford, Ms. Chen interrupted gently. We deal with these situations every day. Our caseworkers are trained to handle potentially volatile parents, and we won't give Mr. Hale any advance warning of our visit. Mrs. Langford left the CPS office feeling hollow. The system designed to protect children like Aiden seemed frustratingly slow and bound by bureaucratic constraints that had nothing to do with a child's immediate safety. As she drove home through the gathering dusk, a plan began to form in her mind, not to replace the official investigation, but to supplement it with her own findings. She would visit Esther Wilkins again. The former nanny might have more information, more details about the Hale household that could help build a stronger case for Aiden's removal. The following evening, Mrs. Langford once again sat across from Esther in the small cafe outside town. The older woman's hands cupped a mug of chamomile tea, her knuckles gnarled with arthritis but still elegant, the nails neatly trimmed and painted a soft pink. I've been thinking about Aiden ever since our last conversation, Esther said softly. Wondering if I should have done more, said something sooner. You couldn't have known, Mrs. Langford assured her. And you're helping now, which is what matters. What more can I tell you? Mrs. Langford leaned forward. Anything you remember about Marissa? What was she like? Did she and Wendell argue often? Did she ever indicate she was afraid of him? Esther's gaze turned distant, searching through memories. Marissa was like a bird, delicate, always in motion, always singing. She painted beautiful watercolors that she hung all over the house. A small smile touched her lips. She loved that boy something fierce. Always reading to him, taking him on nature walks, teaching him the names of every flower and tree. The smile faded. But Wendell, he resented their closeness. I could see it in his eyes sometimes, watching them together, like he was outside looking in at something he couldn't have. Did they argue? Not in front of me, not usually, but there was tension, always. And once, Esther paused, her brow furrowing. Once, near the end, I heard them through the wall. Marissa was crying and she shouted, "You won't separate me from him." And Wendell's voice, cold as ice, saying, "Watch me." A chill ran down Mrs. Langford's spine. When was this? The day before she disappeared. I was fired the next morning. Esther's fingers tightened around her mug. I should have known something was wrong, should have reported it. You couldn't have known, Mrs. Langford repeated, though she wondered if it was true. How many people had sensed something amiss in the Hale household but looked away, made excuses, told themselves it wasn't their business? Back in her car, Mrs. Langford sat for a long moment, processing what she'd learned. Esther's account painted a picture of a controlling, jealous man who resented his wife's bond with their son, a man who had threatened to separate them, and then apparently had carried out that threat in the most permanent way possible. The next day at school, Mrs. Langford noticed something tucked into the pocket of Aiden's jacket as it hung on his classroom hook, the corner of a folded piece of paper. When the children filed out for music class, she carefully extracted it, feeling only a twinge of guilt at the invasion of privacy. The potential stakes were too high for such niceties. The note was brief, written in the same careful printing as his drawing. I remember how her hair smelled. It's still on the pillow. Mrs. Langford read the 7 words again and again, trying to decipher their meaning. Was Aiden saying he could still detect his mother's scent on her pillow in that locked room? How would he know that, if he wasn't allowed inside? Unless he had found a way in, despite his father's prohibition. A sudden, reckless resolve took hold of her. She needed to see that room, needed to look beneath those floorboards, needed to find whatever evidence might be hidden there before Wendell Hale had a chance to destroy it. That afternoon, she formulated her plan. She would bring a box of donated children's books to the Hale house, another transparent excuse to gain entry, but one that might work if she timed it right when Wendell might be more receptive. She arrived at 1823 Magnolia Drive just before dinner time, reasoning that Wendell would be home from work but hopefully not yet settled into his evening routine. The golden light of late afternoon slanted across the front yard, giving the modest house a deceptively warm, welcoming appearance. Taking a deep breath, Mrs. Langford approached the front door, balancing a cardboard box of gently used children's books in her arms. She rang the doorbell and waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door swung open to reveal Wendell still in his work clothes, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. The smell of cooking pasta wafted from inside. His eyebrows rose in surprise, then lowered in barely concealed annoyance. Mrs. Langford, twice in 1 week, to what do we owe the pleasure? She hefted the box slightly. The library donated some children's books to our classroom, and I wanted to bring a selection to Aiden personally. I know he enjoys reading about dinosaurs in space, so I picked out some special ones just for him. Wendell's jaw tightened, but his lips curved into a false smile. How thoughtful. Please come in. Once again, she entered the immaculate house, noting the eerie silence. No television, no music, none of the ambient noise that typically filled homes with children. Aiden, Wendell called, his voice echoing down the hallway. Your teacher is here again. Aiden emerged from his room, his expression cautious but his eyes lighting up at the sight of the book box. I thought you might enjoy these, Mrs. Langford said warmly. Would you like to look through them in your room? This time, to her surprise, Wendell nodded. Go ahead, I need to finish dinner anyway. Mrs. Langford followed Aiden down the hallway, hyper-aware of the locked door they passed. The boy's bedroom was small and Spartan. A twin bed with a blue comforter, a simple wooden desk, a bookshelf with only a few volumes. No posters on the walls, no toys scattered about. Nothing to indicate that a child lived there except for a single stuffed bear sitting on the pillow. These are for you, she said, setting the box on his bed. Let's see what treasures we have. As they sat together on the edge of the bed, leafing through picture books about dinosaurs and space exploration, Mrs. Langford felt a sudden impulse. Moving as if by accident, she ran her hand beneath Aiden's pillow as if smoothing the bedding. Her fingers touched something, a piece of paper, folded small and tucked away. Aiden went very still, his eyes widening as he watched her discover his secret. With a questioning look, Mrs. Langford slowly withdrew the paper. Aiden nodded almost imperceptibly, giving her permission to look. She unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a drawing or a note from Aiden this time. It was a letter written in an elegant, flowing script on what had once been cream-colored stationery, but had yellowed slightly with age. The ink had faded to a soft brown, but the message was still clearly legible, a single line that made her blood run cold. "If anyone finds this, please tell my son that I never left him." Mrs. Langford stared at the yellowed paper, its single sentence burning into her consciousness like a brand. The handwriting was unmistakably feminine, flowing, elegant loops that spoke of care and education. This was not the hasty scrawl of someone jotting a casual note, but a deliberate message, perhaps the last one its author had been able to leave. "Aiden," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where did you find this?" The boy's eyes darted nervously toward his bedroom door. He leaned close to her ear, his breath warm and quick. "I snuck in when Dad was sleeping. The key is on top of the doorframe. I'm small enough to reach it if I stand on a chair." Mrs. Langford's heart pounded. This changed everything. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, not just troubling behavior and cryptic drawings. This was evidence. A letter from a woman who, by all official accounts, had died of cancer 2 years ago. A woman who had felt the need to write that she never left her son, as if anticipating that someone might claim she had. "Has your father seen this?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Aiden shook his head vehemently. "I hide at different places, sometimes in my shoe, sometimes under the mattress." His small fingers closed around the edge of the paper. "He can't find it, ever." The fierce protectiveness with which this 7-year-old guarded his mother's final message tore at Mrs. Langford's heart. She gently folded the letter and handed it back to him. "I'll help you, Aiden," she promised, looking directly into his eyes. "I'll find out what happened to your mom." For the first time since she'd known him, Aiden's face transformed. Hope, fragile, tentative, but unmistakable, flickered across his features like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "She didn't leave me," he whispered. "Dad said she did, but she didn't." "I believe you," Mrs. Langford said firmly. A sound from the hallway, footsteps approaching, made them both freeze. Quickly, Aiden slipped the letter back under his pillow and grabbed a book from the box, opening it to a random page just as Wendell appeared in the doorway. "Dinner's ready," he announced, his eyes narrowing slightly as they swept over the scene, Mrs. Langford and Aiden sitting close together on the bed surrounded by books. "You're welcome to join us, Mrs. Langford, though I'm sure you have plans of your own." The false politeness in his voice couldn't mask the underlying message. "Leave now." "Thank you, but I should be getting home," she replied with equally forced warmth. She turned to Aiden. "Enjoy the books. I think you'll especially like the one about space exploration. There's a chapter about hidden discoveries that I think you'll find fascinating." Aiden nodded, understanding her coded message. As she drove away from the Hale house, Mrs. Langford's mind raced. The letter changed everything, but also nothing. It was compelling, certainly, but not enough on its own to trigger immediate action from Child Protective Services. It didn't prove abuse. It didn't prove Marissa Hale was dead rather than simply gone. It didn't explain what might be hidden beneath the floorboards of that locked room. She needed help, someone with legal authority, someone who could act on suspicions and hunches when a child's safety was at stake. Not CPS with their bureaucratic constraints, but someone who could move quickly if necessary. An idea struck her. David Coleman, her childhood friend who had gone on to become a lawyer. They'd grown up together in Tupelo, climbing the same oak trees and swimming in the same creek during those endless summer days of youth. He specialized in family law now, working primarily with custody cases and, crucially, child protection issues. If anyone would know how to navigate this situation, it would be David. That night, after dinner with Tom, Mrs. Langford retreated to her home office and dialed David's cell phone. Despite the late hour, he answered on the third ring. "Sarah Langford," he said warmly. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I need your help, David," she replied, skipping the pleasantries. "It's about one of my students. I think he's in danger, and I think his mother may have been..." She couldn't bring herself to say the word murdered, though it hung unspoken between them. "Tell me everything," David said, his tone shifting from friendly to professional in an instant. For the next 20 minutes, Mrs. Langford recounted the whole story: Aiden's pain and fear, the mysterious circumstances of his mother's supposed death, Esther's account of the stains and the locked room, the drawing indicating something hidden beneath the floorboards, and finally, the letter from Marissa declaring she had never left her son. "This is serious, Sarah," David said when she'd finished. "If what you suspect is true, this boy is living with someone who may have harmed his mother, and is almost certainly harming him. CPS says they need more evidence before they can remove him from the home. They're right, legally speaking, but there are other approaches we can take." He paused, and she could picture him running a hand through his hair as he always did when thinking deeply. "We could petition for an emergency search warrant based on suspicion of harm to a minor and possible evidence of a separate crime. How quickly can we do that? I know Judge Martinez. She takes child safety cases very seriously. If I present this to her first thing tomorrow morning, we might have a warrant by afternoon." Relief flooded through Mrs. Langford. "Thank you, David." "Don't thank me yet," he cautioned. "This is just the first step. And Sarah, be careful. If this man has done what you suspect, he's dangerous." The next morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. Mrs. Langford taught her lessons on autopilot, one eye always on Aiden, who seemed especially withdrawn. During recess, he sat alone on his usual bench staring at nothing, his small body rigid with tension. At lunchtime, her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from David. "Got the warrant. Judge was concerned enough to expedite. Sheriff's deputies will execute search at 4 p.m. today. Meet me at my office at 3. Her hands trembled as she slipped the phone back into her pocket. It was happening. Finally, action was being taken. But would it be in time? And what would they find in that locked room? The afternoon hours ticked by like molasses in January. When the final bell rang at 3:15, Mrs. Langford pulled Principal Morton aside and quickly explained the situation. "I won't be able to attend the staff meeting. There's an emergency situation with Aiden Hale." Principal Morton's eyes widened. "The search warrant came through?" "Yes. We're executing it this afternoon." "Thank God," the older woman murmured. "I've been worried sick about that boy since the day he cried in my office. Go. Do what needs to be done." At precisely 3:45, Mrs. Langford pulled up in front of the Lee County Sheriff's Department, where David waited on the steps. He looked exactly as she remembered, though his dark hair was now peppered with silver at the temples, and lines had formed at the corners of his eyes. Laugh lines, she noted with fondness, despite the gravity of the moment. "The deputies are ready," he said without preamble as she approached. Judge Martinez authorized a full search of the premises, with particular attention to the locked bedroom and any areas underneath floorboards or foundation. "Will Aiden be there?" she asked, suddenly concerned about the trauma the boy might experience seeing law enforcement swarm his home. "No. The warrant is timed for when he should be at after-school care. We want him away from the scene, both for his protection and to ensure his father can't influence his statements if we find something." They followed the Sheriff's Department SUV and David's sedan, maintaining a careful distance as they drove through Tupelo's quiet streets toward Magnolia Drive. Mrs. Langford's stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. What would they find behind that locked door? Part of her hoped for Aiden's sake that she was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation for everything. But the teacher's intuition that had rarely failed her in 23 years was screaming that something terrible waited to be discovered in that house. The sheriff's vehicle pulled to the curb 3 houses down from the Hale residence, and David parked behind it. 2 deputies emerged, their expressions professionally neutral as David approached and showed them the warrant. "Remember," the lead deputy, a broad-shouldered woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, said quietly, "We're looking for evidence of child abuse and possibly other crimes. Document everything, touch as little as possible." Mrs. Langford hung back as the deputies approached the house, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. They knocked on the door, once, twice, 3 times. No answer. "Mr. Hale," the female deputy called. "Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant to search the premises." Silence. Then, from inside, the sound of breaking glass. The deputies exchanged glances, and without further hesitation, the male deputy stepped back and kicked the door open with a splintering crash. They disappeared inside, hands on their holstered weapons. Mrs. Langford and David waited anxiously by the car, minutes stretching like hours. Finally, the female deputy emerged, her face grim. "He's not here," she said. "But you're going to want to see what we found." Mrs. Langford followed the female deputy, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, through the splintered doorframe of the Hale residence. The air inside felt different now, charged with tension and the disturbed dust of secrets long buried. Deputy Maxwell, Rodriguez's partner, was speaking urgently into his radio in the kitchen, requesting additional units and a forensics team. "This way," Rodriguez said, leading them down the hallway toward the locked door that had haunted Mrs. Langford's thoughts for weeks. The deadbolt had been forced open, the wood around it splintered from the impact of what was likely a small battering ram. The door itself stood ajar, revealing a slice of the room beyond. Pale blue walls, gauzy curtains billowing slightly in the breeze from an open window. "Brace yourself," Rodriguez warned as she pushed the door fully open. Mrs. Langford stepped inside and felt her breath catch in her throat. The room was a perfectly preserved shrine, a queen-sized bed with a floral comforter neatly made, a vanity with cosmetics and perfume bottles arranged just so, watercolor paintings hanging on every wall. A woman's clothing still hung in the open closet, shoes lined up beneath them. On the nightstand sat a framed photograph of Marissa Hale, dark-haired and beautiful, her arm around a younger Aiden, both laughing at something outside the frame. But it was what lay in the center of the room that drew their attention. A section of hardwood flooring, approximately 4 feet square, had been pried up to reveal the space beneath. Inside was a wooden box, its lid open to expose the contents. Dozens of letters bound with blue ribbon, a small velvet pouch, a child's drawing, and a legal document on top. "We found this when we checked under the floorboards where you said to look," Rodriguez explained, her voice professionally detached despite the clear emotion in her eyes. "At first glance, it appears to be a cache of personal documents and correspondence that someone went to great lengths to hide." David stepped forward, carefully picking up the legal document with a gloved hand. "This is a birth certificate," he said, scanning the paper. "For Aiden Hale. Father's name is listed as unknown. Mother is listed as Marissa Ashton, her maiden name, I'm guessing. And there's something else here." He gently shifted the papers. "A last will and testament, notarized. It names Marissa's parents as Aiden's legal guardians in the event of her death or incapacitation." "The grandmother in Florida that Esther mentioned," Mrs. Langford whispered. David nodded. "If this is legitimate, Wendell Hale has no legal right to custody of Aiden. He's not listed as the father on the birth certificate, and the mother's will explicitly names other guardians." Rodriguez was examining the letters. "These are dated," she said. "The most recent ones are from about 2 years ago. They're addressed to various people. Aiden, someone named Eleanor, and Robert Ashton, even authorities, but they were never mailed." He intercepted her attempts to reach out, Mrs. Langford realized, the horror of it washing over her. He kept her isolated, controlled her communication. Deputy Maxwell appeared in the doorway. "We've got something else," he said grimly. "You need to see this." They followed him to a room at the opposite end of the hall, a small home office with filing cabinets and a desktop computer. Maxwell pointed to an open drawer in the filing cabinet. "Found these buried in the back." David carefully extracted the documents. Admission papers for a patient named Marissa Hale to Oakwood Psychiatric Facility in Meridian, Mississippi, dated 2 years earlier. The admitting physician was listed as Dr. Howard Graves. The diagnosis: paranoid delusions, suicidal ideation, possible schizophrenia. The commitment was involuntary, David noted, his lawyer's eyes quickly finding the relevant sections. Requested by her husband, Wendell Hale, and approved by Dr. Graves. So she's not dead, Mrs. Langford breathed. She's been in a psychiatric facility this whole time, committed by her husband. And there's more, Maxwell said, gesturing to another document. Monthly payment records to the facility, but also this. He held up a notarized document. It's a power of attorney, giving Wendell Hale complete control over Marissa's medical decisions, finances, everything. Signed by Marissa, supposedly. David examined the signature carefully. This doesn't match the handwriting on the letters or the will, he said slowly. Not even close. Forged, Rodriguez concluded. As the implication sank in, Mrs. Langford felt a wave of nausea. He locked her away, told everyone she was dead, kept her son from her, all based on falsified documents. And he's been using her money to pay for her confinement, David added, pointing to bank statements showing regular withdrawals from an account in Marissa's name. There are substantial funds here and it looks like she came from money. Rodriguez was already on her radio. We need to contact Oakwood Psychiatric immediately, she said urgently. Patient name Marissa Hale, admitted approximately 2 years ago, and put out an APB for Wendell Hale. Possible charges of fraud, false imprisonment, child abuse, and document forgery. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. More deputies arrived, along with crime scene technicians who carefully documented and collected the evidence from beneath the floorboards. Mrs. Langford sat in the living room, still trying to process the horror of what they'd discovered. Not a murder, as she'd feared, but in some ways something almost worse. A woman stripped of her freedom, her identity, her child, locked away on false pretenses while her husband controlled her fortune and raised her son to believe she was dead. We've made contact with Oakwood, Rodriguez announced, returning from a phone call in the kitchen. Marissa Hale is indeed a patient there. They're reviewing her case immediately in light of our findings. We've requested that they secure her safety and prevent any contact from Wendell Hale. What about Aiden? Mrs. Langford asked, suddenly remembering the time. He'll be finished with after-school care soon. Wendell might try to take him. We've dispatched officers to the school, Rodriguez assured her. The boy will be taken into protective custody until we can sort this out. David, who had been on his own phone in the corner, approached. I just spoke with Judge Martinez again. Based on what we've found, she's issued an emergency order placing Aiden in temporary foster care. She's also authorized us to contact Marissa's parents in Florida, the Ashtons, regarding possible guardianship per Marissa's will. Mrs. Langford felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by concern. Aiden will be terrified if strangers just take him from school. He needs a familiar face, someone he trusts. Rodriguez considered this. You're right. Would you be willing to accompany our officers? It might make the transition easier for him. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Langford sat in the back of a police cruiser, heading toward Parkway Elementary's after-school program. Her thoughts were with Aiden. How would he react to the news? Would he understand what was happening? And Marissa? What state would she be in after 2 years of unnecessary confinement? At the school, Mrs. Langford found Aiden sitting alone at a table in the cafeteria, coloring half-heartedly while the other children played games around him. When he saw her enter with the uniformed officers, his eyes widened with fear. She hurried to his side, kneeling to his level. It's okay, Aiden, she said softly. You're not in trouble. These officers are here to help you. Where's my dad? He asked, his voice small. Mrs. Langford took his hands in hers. Aiden, we found something important today. Something that changes everything. She took a deep breath. We found out that your mom is alive. The crayon fell from his fingers. His face went completely still, uncomprehending. But Dad said she died. From being sick in her head. Your mom is sick, but she's not dead, Mrs. Langford explained gently. She's in a hospital and we're going to see if we can help her get better. And until then, you're going to stay with some very nice people who will take care of you. Tears welled up in Aiden's eyes. Can I see her? My mom? We're working on that, she promised. But first we need to get you somewhere safe. As they walked out to the waiting police car, Aiden's small hand clutched tightly in hers. Mrs. Langford felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. The boy who had been silent for so long had finally been heard. The mother who had never abandoned her son might finally be reunited with him. And the man who had orchestrated this cruel separation would face justice. Later that evening, as Aiden settled into his temporary foster home, a warm, comfortable place with kind guardians who specialized in trauma cases, the call came through that they'd all been waiting for. Wendell Hale had been apprehended trying to cross the state line into Alabama, and more importantly, the medical director at Oakwood Psychiatric had conducted an emergency review of Marissa Hale's case and found disturbing irregularities. "She's being released," David told Mrs. Langford over the phone. "The preliminary review suggests she never needed to be there in the first place. Dr. Graves, who approved her commitment, has close ties to Wendell Hale. They were college roommates. The whole thing stinks of corruption and conspiracy." "How is she?" Mrs. Langford asked, her heart aching for this woman she'd never met, whose suffering she could barely imagine. "Physically healthy according to the report, emotionally fragile, understandably, but lucid, coherent, and desperate to see her son." 3 days later, that reunion finally happened. In a quiet room at the Lee County Family Services Center, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture chosen to create a sense of warmth and safety, Marissa Hale waited. She was thinner than in her photographs, her once vibrant dark hair now streaked with premature gray, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. But her eyes, the same deep brown as her son's, were clear and alert, burning with emotion. When the door opened and Aiden entered, followed closely by Mrs. Langford, Marissa froze. For a long moment, mother and son stared at each other across the room, both seemingly unable to believe that this moment was real. "Mommy," Aiden whispered, his voice breaking on the word. Marissa couldn't speak. She simply opened her arms, tears streaming down her face. Aiden ran to her, collapsing into her embrace as if his legs could no longer support him. They clung to each other, both sobbing now, two pieces of a broken whole finally reunited. Mrs. Langford stepped quietly out of the room, giving them privacy for this sacred moment. Through the observation window, she watched as Marissa rocked her son, stroking his hair, pressing kisses to his forehead. She watched as Aiden looked up at his mother with wonder and relief, his small hand reaching up to touch her face as if to confirm she was real. And in that moment, amidst all the horror and injustice they had uncovered, there was this one perfect thing: a mother and son, torn apart by cruelty, finding their way back to each other's arms. 6 months had passed since that fateful day when Mrs. Langford discovered Marissa Hale's letter beneath her son's pillow. The Mississippi spring had arrived in full force, painting Tupelo with dogwood blossoms and azaleas, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the cold, gray winter that had finally released its grip. On a quiet street just 5 blocks from Parkway Elementary, a small yellow bungalow with white trim and a front porch swing had become home to Aiden and Marissa Hale. The house was modest: 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, a kitchen with checkered curtains. But after what they had endured, it felt like a palace of freedom. Mrs. Langford pulled her car into the driveway, gathering the stack of books she'd brought from the school library. She visited often, helping Aiden with his studies and providing quiet support to Marissa, who was still finding her footing in a world that had continued without her for 2 long years. As she approached the front door, she heard laughter from inside, Aiden's high, childish giggle accompanied by Marissa's softer chuckle. The sound warmed her heart. When she first met him, Aiden had been a shadow of a child, hollowed out by fear and grief. Now, bit by bit, he was reclaiming the childhood that had been stolen from him. "Come in, it's open," Marissa called when Mrs. Langford knocked. Inside, the living room was bathed in afternoon sunlight. Aiden sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by Lego pieces constructing what appeared to be a spaceship. Marissa was curled up on the sofa nearby, a sketchbook in her lap, colored pencils scattered around her. "Mrs. Langford!" Aiden exclaimed, jumping up to greet her. The change in him over these months had been remarkable. Though still quiet compared to many children his age, he smiled now, made eye contact, laughed freely. The dark circles beneath his eyes had vanished and he had gained weight, his cheeks full and healthy. "I brought those space books you asked about," Mrs. Langford said, setting the stack on the coffee table. "And a special surprise." She pulled out a thin volume with a shimmering cover. "This one just came into the library yesterday. All about black holes. I thought you might like it." Aiden's eyes lit up as he took the book reverently. "Thanks, I'm doing my science project on black holes now." "He's become quite the astronomer," Marissa said with a proud smile, rising to greet Mrs. Langford with a warm hug. "Thank you for coming." Marissa, too, had transformed, though she still carried the shadows of her ordeal, startling at unexpected noises, occasional distant gazes when memories surfaced. Her natural vibrancy had begun to return. She had resumed her watercolor painting, filling the house with bright landscapes and whimsical scenes. Her hair, once dull and limp from medication and confinement, now fell in healthy waves around her shoulders, the premature gray strands somehow adding character rather than age to her youthful face. "Would you like some tea?" Marissa offered, heading toward the kitchen. "I just made a fresh pot." "That would be lovely," Mrs. Langford replied, following her. As Marissa filled 2 mugs with fragrant chamomile tea, she spoke quietly, ensuring Aiden couldn't overhear from the living room where he was already engrossed in his new book. "We had another nightmare last night," she confided, her hands steady, but her eyes troubled. "He was calling out in his sleep. When I went to him, he was drenched in sweat, saying over and over, 'Don't let him take me.'" Mrs. Langford nodded sympathetically. "The therapist said these might continue for some time. Trauma doesn't heal in a straight line." "I know," Marissa sighed. "It's just hard to hear him so afraid even now, even knowing that Wendell is locked away." Wendell Hale's trial had concluded just 2 weeks earlier. The evidence against him had been overwhelming. Falsified medical documents, forged power of attorney, financial fraud, child abuse, and perhaps most damning of all, conspiracy with Dr. Howard Graves to commit Marissa unnecessarily. He had been sentenced to 15 years in state prison, with Dr. Graves receiving 8 years for his role in the scheme. The important thing is that Aiden feels safe enough now to let those fears surface, Mrs. Langford said gently. "He's not holding everything inside anymore, that's progress." Marissa nodded, managing a small smile. "You're right, and this morning when he woke up, he actually talked about it. Said that in the dream, he was trying to tell someone what was happening, but no one would listen." Her voice broke slightly. That was his reality for so long, trying to reach out, but no one understanding. "Until he found the courage to tell me it hurt," Mrs. Langford said softly, remembering that fateful morning in her classroom that now seemed so long ago. They carried their tea back to the living room, where Aiden had abandoned his book temporarily to return to his Lego construction. Mrs. Langford noticed a new addition to the room, a bulletin board on the wall covered with colorful drawings, school papers with bright red A's and photographs. One photo in particular caught her eye, Aiden and Marissa on the beach, their arms around each other, squinting into the sun with identical smiles. "You went to Florida?" she asked. Marissa nodded. "Last weekend. My parents drove up from Naples to meet us in Pensacola. It was the first time they'd seen Aiden in almost 3 years. Her eyes grew misty. "My father cried when he hugged him. He's not a man who cries easily." The Ashtons had been desperately searching for their daughter and grandson since losing contact with them shortly after Wendell had forced the family to move to Tupelo. He had systematically cut off all communication, telling Marissa that her parents wanted nothing to do with her, while telling the Ashtons that Marissa had chosen to sever ties. The painful misunderstanding had only been resolved after Wendell's arrest, when investigators had tracked down the elderly couple in Florida. "They're moving here next month," Marissa continued, her voice brightening. "They found a little house just a few streets over. After everything, well, none of us wants to be separated by distance anymore." As the afternoon sun began to slant toward evening, Mrs. Langford reluctantly prepared to leave. She had papers to grade and lessons to plan for the next day. Aiden walked her to the door, clutching his new book about black holes. "Mrs. Langford," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "Can I show you something before you go?" "Of course," she replied. He darted back to his bedroom and returned moments later with a piece of paper, carefully folded. He handed it to her with solemn importance. Mrs. Langford unfolded it to find a drawing, one of Aiden's, done in colored pencil with careful attention to detail. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a yellow house: a tall woman with long dark hair, a small boy, and another woman with light brown hair pulled back in a bun. All 3 were holding hands, all 3 were smiling. Across the top, in his careful printing, he had written, "My family." "That's you," he explained, pointing to the figure with the bun. "You're part of our family now." Mrs. Langford felt tears spring to her eyes. "Oh, Aiden," she whispered. "Thank you. This is the most beautiful gift." After she left, driving home through the golden evening light, Mrs. Langford's thoughts drifted back over the extraordinary events of the past 6 months. The system had failed Marissa and Aiden in so many ways. Neighbors who hadn't questioned a woman's sudden disappearance. Medical professionals who had accepted a husband's word without proper evaluation. School administrators who had missed the signs of a child in distress. But in the end, it had been Aiden himself who had saved them both. A 7-year-old boy who, despite his fear, had found the courage to whisper those fateful words. "It hurts. It was my dad." A child who had hidden his mother's letter beneath his pillow like a talisman, preserving the truth when all else conspired to bury it. That night, as Marissa tucked Aiden into bed, she noticed something different beneath his pillow. Not her old letter, which was now safely preserved in a keepsake box, but a new piece of paper, folded small. "What's this?" she asked gently. Aiden looked up at her, his eyes serious in the glow of his rocket ship nightlight. "It's for you," he said. Marissa unfolded the paper to find a note written in Aiden's careful hand. "Now I know. You never left me." Tears sprang to her eyes as she gathered her son close, breathing in the clean scent of his freshly washed hair. They had lost so much. Nearly 3 years of their lives together, countless moments that could never be reclaimed. But they had found their way back to each other, guided by a child's unwavering certainty that his mother would never willingly abandon him, and a teacher's determination to hear the truth in a whispered plea. Wendell's plan had been calculated and cruel. He had exploited the system, manipulated those in positions of authority, and nearly succeeded in destroying 2 lives for his own gain. But in the end, his elaborate architecture of lies had been toppled by the simplest and most powerful force of all: the love between a mother and her child, a bond that had survived separation, medication, and years of calculated deception. As spring deepened toward summer in Tupelo, Aiden and Marissa continued their journey of healing. There were still difficult days, court appearances, therapy sessions, nightmares that left them both shaken. But there were beautiful moments too. Marissa teaching Aiden to mix watercolors on a real artist's palette, weekend visits to the nearby lake, evenings spent reading together on the porch swing as fireflies danced in the gathering dusk. And on Aiden's desk in Mrs. Langford's classroom, where once he had sat silent and afraid, now stood a small framed photograph of Aiden and his mother, their matching smiles bright in the Mississippi sunlight, a red-colored pencil tucked into the frame's edge, a quiet reminder of the power of a child's voice finally heard. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from the smallest voices. Mrs. Langford could have dismissed Aiden's pain as a simple childhood complaint, but instead, she listened when others wouldn't. She followed her instincts when evidence was scarce. She persisted when the system failed. What would you have done in her place? Would you have noticed the silent cries of a child trapped in a nightmare? Would you have risked your career, your reputation, your safety to follow the trail of a mother's hidden letter? In a world where it's easier to look away than to look closer, Aiden and Marissa's story reminds us that evil often hides behind ordinary doors and pleasant smiles. It thrives in silence and isolation. But it can be defeated by something as simple as paying attention, by refusing to accept convenient lies, by believing a child's whispered truth. The locked rooms of suffering exist all around us, not just in dramatic stories, but in real neighborhoods, real schools, real families. Will you be the one who notices? Will you be the one who acts? If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who might need to hear its message. Sometimes sharing a story can save a life. Follow our channel for more powerful narratives that shine light into the darkest corners of human experience. Like this video, leave a comment about what this story means to you, and remember, every child deserves someone who will listen when they say, "It hurts."